this video, we're going to talk about Java exception handling, and specifically, we're going to focus on how we use the finally clause in our exception handling. So here we have a really simple Java program that has a method that will read a number in from the user, prints the number out that the user entered, and then returns that number. In our main method, we set a variable to the result of that, and then we print that same result in our output. There's things we could do to make this program better, but our focus is not really on this program as much as how we can handle exceptions. So if I run this and nothing goes wrong, let's say I enter a number, then you can see everything works as we would expect. However, if I enter a string, then you'll notice we get an exception. Specifically, we get an input mismatch exception. So one way to handle this would be to wrap the code that may cause an exception in a try-catch. So Eclipse will actually put that exception handling code in there for us automatically. If we right-click on the code and then say surround with try-catch, now you'll notice I get the code I selected in a try block, and then there's a catch. I'll specifically here catch the input mismatch exception. How did I know to do this? Well, you can see that that's the exception that was thrown when I gave it that bad input. This is going to want me to import that class, and I'll have Eclipse do that for me automatically. And then what should I do in this case? Well, suppose I want to say something like this. And actually, let's print this to System.err instead of System.out. And I don't really want to print the stack trace. So let's run this again. So if I enter a number, it's going to work. If I enter a string, it's going to say you did not enter a valid input. And this should be a print line. But I think other than that, this is good. So let's try this one more time. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, so some things we need to look at here. Suppose we want to return a -1 in this case. So now I did enter a valid input, so the result is -1. Okay, so that's good. Now you'll notice here, we're getting a warning and we have a resource leak, and that is that this is never closed. I could close it here, and you'll notice that gets rid of this error. However, notice I have another problem. In this case, the resource leak is not closed at this location. What this means is I need to close it here. And in fact, if I put my close here, then in either of these cases, close will get called. I clean up the input. Notice there's no warning here still. But now notice I have this duplicated code. So what I can do is I can add a finally block, and I can even put this print statement here. And we don't want to put the return in the finally block. This return -1 should be here, and then I'll leave the regular return here. Now, this finally block is going to get executed no matter what happens. Now, you may say, wouldn't anything here be executed no matter what? And the answer to that is actually no, because notice here, I'm returning -1. So if this catch gets called, this method is going to return immediately with a value of -1. The finally block will make sure that everything here is going to be executed before the method returns. So here, I can put my close there, and you'll notice I don't have a warning here anymore saying that there's a resource leak, because the finally block closes whether or not there's an exception. And again, yes, I could in theory put all of this code at the end of the block if this catch didn't return. But again, sometimes you want to return and stop processing in your catch. And so the finally block allows you to decide whether you want to return or not from your catch. But you know that this code is going to get executed before the function returns. So if I run this and enter a number, my result is going to be 7. My result is 7. What I would expect. If I run this again, this fails. You did not enter a valid input. Your result is going to be 0, and the result is -1. And again, it printed this out. Num is initialized to 0, but we return -1. So that's a bug in what gets displayed here, but that doesn't really affect our code. And again, it's an exception case. This is what we would want. Now, does this finally block always get executed? So, tricky question. The answer is, if the code continues executing normally, the finally block will be executed. If your computer explodes, if your Java virtual machine crashes somehow, yes, there are cases where this finally block would not be executed. However, in any case, that doesn't mean you have much more significant problems to worry about. The finally block will be executed whether or not there's an exception. And so anything you want to put there would work. And one ideal thing to put there would be closing all of your resources that you've allocated, whether it's scanners, network connections, that sort of thing. Now you can also use what's called a try with resources block. That'll do that for you automatically. But even in those cases, there's still times where you would want something in that finally. You want to make sure that gets done no matter what, whether there's an exception or not. So the code here would get executed no matter what. If I put something here, this would only be executed if there was no input mismatch exception, because the input mismatch exception handler will return anytime an input mismatch exception occurs. So that's a quick introduction to how to use a finally block and what it's there for. Again, it's possible to design your code to where you don't need one, but it's an option available to you if you need it.